Well, good morning again, everybody. You know, just when you think you have a good bead on things, it was last summer, and I was taking a youth group to Mexico to do a mission trip, our first youth international mission trip. And I had a wide variety of kids. There were something like 25 high schoolers that went on this trip, and a bunch of adults. There were close to 30 of us by the time we were all done. And they ranged in everything from kids that were in church all the time to people that you never see. And I had a couple of outlaws in the group. A few things like that. And so watching pretty carefully, things went really well, especially the first part of the trip. But I noticed the first day we sat down for supper, and they were all buried in their telephones. All right? And they're looking across, they're sitting here to here, right? And they're like this, and you're down like this, and they don't even see each other. And so I thought, we got to fix that. There's a human body right across the table. They don't even see it. And so I said, I tell you what, let's start this. At mealtime, let's just put the phones away. And I started talking about how the joys of conversation and how you can connect with people on a very different level, and it's person to person, it's heart to heart. Went through that whole spiel. And so the next morning, no telephones. I was so proud of myself. And they started talking to each other. I was really proud of myself at that point. And we went through the day, and we were doing construction that day, and it was a good day. Everybody worked their tails off. And so we got back in, and of course, Mexico in July, it is like crazy hot. And so we got in, we're all sweaty. They worked hard, taking some water breaks, because you got to do that when you can work 20 minutes, and you got to take a 5-minute water break after 20 minutes, because the water just pours out of you. And so we got in the vans, and they said, Pastor Dave, do you mind if we listen to some tunes? And I said, sure. So they plugged in one of their telephones to the radio with an aux cord, and they started listening. And the first couple of songs, I just sort of tuned it out. But then there was this song, and it was kind of hip hop, and I really tuned those out because I do not understand rap music at all. This makes no sense. This was different. Whoever was doing this caught my attention immediately. It was a story about a young man who was sitting in his car, and someone had stolen the radio out of his car. So there's a hole where the radio was. And now he has to sit there in silence. And it's terrifying to him because he's alone in his thoughts, and they're dark and they're troubling, and he can't get away from them. And he talks about breathing in fire and exhaling desire. He talks about the person that he's killed in his thoughts and his dreams. He talks about the silence that is just terrifying. He said, quiet can be so violent. And I thought, whoa. And I'm sitting in the front seat, and I turn around and I look. And I got 17 teenagers behind me. And most of them are mouthing the words. Some of them have their eyes closed. They're going like this with the music. And the song came to the end, and I said, play that again. And they said, Pastor Dave, really? Yes, play that again. And they played it again. I caught more of the words. And they're doing it again. They're just engrossed in this thing. And the song ended the second time. And before I said play it again the third time, I said, is this how you guys feel about life? The van got really quiet. And finally, one of the outlaws said, all the time. And I said, there's a sermon in there. They said, really? I want to hear that. But what I didn't tell them was that the sermon was for me, not for them. Because earlier in the day, I took away their lifesaver, thinking that making eye contact with somebody and a little pleasant conversation over the table would be really good for them. And I will tell you, it is good for them. But in terms of what these kids were dealing with, the way their life was panning out, I was just cutting them off. I mean, my little requests, my little idea of what they ought to be and where they should go with this thing is paltry compared with having to live with the dark monsters inside. And because their preacher doesn't even understand that, they have to do it by themselves. Just when you think you got a bead on things. Let's sing. Hey, Allie, could you kick it up a little bit? I got a couple people tugging on their ears here. Thanks. So I thought about these things as I thought about this story that I just read to you, the story that Allie talked about in the children's sermon, the Tower of Babel. Because really what we're talking about here is understanding a language that is hidden, isn't it? And the Tower of Babel story, it starts out, it looks like there's a lot of good intentions going on here. People are gathering together from all over the earth, and they're coming together and they decide that they're going to cooperate. They're going to work together. They're going to build a city. They're going to live in that city together. And everything looks pretty good at first, but then somewhere along the line, it takes a twist in a very unpleasant direction. Because they start building this tower to the sky. And they say, come, let us make a name for ourselves. And what happens in that twist is cooperation turns into ambition. And the people that they're working together with become pawns for self-serving goals. They want to be themselves. They want to be their own gods. They want to be in charge of things. And that's when the scattering begins. The Bible tells us that when these things happen, it says that God is disturbed by this and he confuses their language so that they can't understand each other. But I know that's one of those curses that's in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. But I will tell you that with every one of those curses, Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden. There's going to be pain in childbirth. There's going to be Adam having to work for a living. Cain can't farm the ground anymore. All God's doing there is saying, this is the world you've created for yourself. You want to do this on your own, Adam and Eve? Then do it on your own. If you want to do it without me, do it without me. The blood that's spilled, that Cain spills, the blood of his brother Abel, spills upon the ground, and it taints the ground that he works on. It's not God doing that to him. It's not God throwing down lightning bolts and zapping him. It's God saying, this is what happens when we hurt and destroy each other. Your world, your means of living gets tainted. Everything about your life gets tainted. And that's what's happening here as well. People are working to cooperate, but the cooperation becomes ambition. People are working for each other, and then they start working for themselves to make their own name for themselves. And their language is confused. They don't understand each other. The Hebrew word, interestingly enough, for understand, can really be translated hear. They don't hear each other. They start talking past each other. They think they've got a good bead on things. They think they understand what's going on. They think they know how to work people to get people to do what they want, what they want them to do. And when you start talking past each other, the scattering begins. The languages are confused. We stop listening to each other. And I believe with all my heart that it has everything to do with who you are. You see, up until this point, they're children of God. They are named by God as his own. And you know, when you're a child of God, when you're named by this God, you are who this God is. The God who names you makes you who you are. And what we know about this God is that he's a loving God, is he's a self-giving God. This is a God who puts others, even the smallest others in the universe, before himself. And this is the God who names you. This is the God who names those people who are building that tower. And they say, no, I don't want your name, God. I want a name for myself. I'm going to call myself what I am. We talked about this on Wednesday night, right? That it's not good for us to be able to name who we are, because there's a loving God above us who places in our heart the love that he has for you and for me. Let's sing. Just when you think you have a good beat on things. It was my first week in St. Olaf. It was July of 2000. And I was invited, actually, before I started working or getting paid to work there, I was invited to their foundation meeting. And so I sat in the back room and I listened, and the foundation meeting went on for about a half an hour before I finally said something. And I don't remember what I said. It was just one or two words. I just opened my mouth. And the whole room stopped and turned and looked at me. I thought I was in a Merrill Lynch commercial. And you know, I gotta tell you, that's a little heady to think you've got that kind of power. I've had similar experiences here. You know, I walk in the door and everybody, so what's the plan here, Pastor? What are we going to do? And you know, I can tell you what the plan is. I can tell you the 4 or 5 things I'd like to do. I can couch it in all the right language. I can talk about mission. I can talk about outreach. But that's kind of dangerous, because we always have to beware. Is the plan my plan? Is the plan your plan? It's insidious. Or do we track all of our plans and get out of the way for something that seems serendipitous, but is a direction that God wants us to go? I told you the story about Allie and Shelley and I sitting down and putting this program together, this reading and math program. I've told you the story. You already know it. You're probably tired of hearing about it. But let me tell you again. we had no idea this was going to happen when we started meeting. She built these beautiful plans. Who's going to come in and do it? I don't know, she says. All of a sudden, it occurred to us that there's no summer school. God stuck that right in front of us. This is direction. And it wasn't our plan. Now, some of our plans fit into it, but it wasn't our plan. I think about that as well for our families and the way we live our lives and the businesses that we build, the wealth we amass, and the presence in the community that we construct. And we need to always remember in all of that who we are, who we belong to. Because it's not your name. It's not my name. We've got a Father in heaven who loves us so much that he constructs a building that is designed to be torn down. Let me say that again. The Father in heaven constructs a building, a temple, that is designed and constructed for the purpose of being torn down. The very stone that the builders rejected became the head of the corner. It was leveled. Jesus was brought down, nailed on a cross until he breathed his last. And that was God's plan, and that was God's purpose. I can promise you it wasn't Jesus's, because the night before all this happens, he says, Father, if this cup can pass from me, let it be so. That's God's plan. And he does it so that there is nothing left but a foundation. Lower than everything. Lower than the people who nailed him on the cross. Lower than you. Lower than me. Lower than the hardest criminal. Lower than everything. Because as you know from these last few weeks with all the water, everything funnels to the lowest point. And for God, that lowest point is his love for you. So that whatever foundation you have built, whatever it is that you deal with, whatever silence is in your heart, as frightening as it might be, he draws you by love to him. And then we gather together as a church, and we wonder what our purpose is. And you say, so Pastor, what's the plan? And I've got a new answer. I don't know. But let's see what happens. And you get together with your spouse, your children, and you talk about the future. And when you think about that future, the best thing you can say is, I don't know. Let's see what happens. Because God has a way of ruining foundations. But that ruining is the beginning of your salvation and my salvation. And for that we give him thanks and praise. Amen.